Morning dear students, welcome back to yet another session of English class. I'm really happy to be with you online, and today's class is meant for class 9 students, and we will be discussing a story today. The title, as you see, is ISHWARAN the Storyteller. So as the title suggests, this man Ishwaran is a very good storyteller. That is the first point that you need to keep in mind. Put it at the back of your mind. But before we get into the story, let me give you a brief background information about the writer, because the writer is a very important man. Who is the writer? He is R.K. Lakshman. If you remember the great writer R.K. Narayan, some of you might have watched the serial Malgudi Days. The writer of that story is R.K. Narayan. He is one of the celebrated Indo-Anglian writers. There are many Indo-Anglian writers, but among them R.K. Narayan occupies a very significant place. He has written several novels like The Guide, which has come out into a film version. And this R.K. Narayan is a brother of that great Indo-Anglian writer. R.K. Lakshman is the brother of that great Indo-Anglian writer. That is R.K. Narayan. So, R.K. Lakshman, the brother of R.K. Narayan, was a cartoonist. I hope you understand the meaning of the word cartoonist. One who draws cartoons is a cartoonist. And this great man, R.K. Lakshman, the brother of R.K. Narayan, was working for a newspaper, and he was drawing or contributing cartoons for the Times of India. Times of India is one of the most important national dailies, and R.K. Lakshman was distributing cartoons, or he was drawing cartoons for quite some time, for many years. And he became famous for his cartoons, his works, and he came to be considered as one of the greatest cartoonists India has ever produced. And for his contribution, the government of India honored him with several awards, starting with Padma Shri, then Padma Bhushan, and he also won an international award, that is the Raymond Magsaysay Award. Raymond Magsaysay Award is an award that is given to people who have made a significant contribution to a particular field, especially the field of literature. So it is given to some writers, some novelists, and R.K. Lakshman was fortunate enough to be honored with this Raymond Magsaysay Award. So much for the writer of this lesson. Now, the next point that we have to focus on is storytelling. I think there would hardly be anyone in this world who does not like stories. Everyone likes stories. We are fond of listening to stories in whatever form it may be. For example, when you were small kids, your grandmother might have definitely told you a lot of stories. Granny's tales, right? So grandmothers, they are the best storytellers, and they are the first storytellers for us. They have such talent and such imagination, with so much of description, with such a vivid description, that we would love to hear grandma's tales over and over again. So when children refuse to sleep or have difficulty in sleeping, it is the grannies who take the responsibility of putting them to bed. And before putting them to bed, they start with their stories and the children sleep. So storytelling is an art. There are several arts, but among those arts is definitely storytelling. And this needs a lot of imagination, you know. People who have the capacity to imagine things can be good storytellers. And some people, you see, you have lots of teachers coming to your class and teaching. Some of the teachers you might have found to have this quality of storytelling. When they narrate something, it becomes so realistic. Though it is not realistic, they present it in such a way that it appears appears to be real and living, or they have the lifelike narration. They put everything together in such a manner and produce a story, and the moment you begin to listen to those stories, you feel to understand, my God, this seems to be real. Because of the imagination that they put into the story, it becomes realistic. So storytelling requires a lot of practice. It is an art that has to be learnt in due course of time. You have to use the sounds, the right kind of sounds. Okay? For example, if a grandma is producing the picture of a lion or telling a story in which a lion is a character, she tries to produce the sound, the roaring of a lion. Or if she's talking about some birds, she tries to imitate the sounds of the birds, the chirping. Okay? So use of sounds, the use of right places, giving the correct description of the places that you're talking about. And the people who are involved in that story, they all matter a lot. They have to be presented in a very precise manner and in an effective manner. So when you do that, the story becomes more realistic and more interesting to listen to. Otherwise, it becomes just a flat and a dry narration. What do you mean by flat and dry narration? A story without any life, a story without any expression, a story without the proper characters presented in the proper way makes it a flat narration. And when you give a flat narration, people are not interested in listening to the story. Okay, with this background information in mind, now we get into the story. ISHWARAN, the storyteller. But again, before we get into the story, before we begin to analyze the story, let us have a look at this point, because this is very much connected to the story. You see, there are different kinds of stories. There are fairy tales meant for children. There are stories which involve thrill and adventure. There are stories which involve crime. Okay, so stories can be of different kinds. Okay, we call them a genre. Genre means the kind of story. But sometimes stories might be very frightening. They are known as horror stories. You must have watched some horror films, right? And there are stories which are novels which are horrifying, which create a sense of fear in you. For example, Dracula. Dracula is one of the most horrifying novels to have ever been written. Count Dracula. He's a vampire, a blood-sucking vampire, and he comes and disturbs people. And the way Bram Stoker, the writer, produces it, made it a huge success. And many versions, film versions, have been produced. So, now what I'm coming to tell you is, supposing your friend is narrating a story and you take it to be a kind of crime story or a ghost story. So he presents the ghost in such a way that you start thinking seriously about it. And the effect is so deep in you that even after the completion of the story, even after listening to that story, the characters are deeply set in your mind. They are registered in your mind because the presenter, the one who was telling the story, made it so lively and so realistic that the characters keep coming in your mind again and again. So you always keep thinking of that. You are preoccupied with the thoughts of the ghosts or the characters which were presented. When you are deeply affected, or scared by something that enters your subconscious mind, you are haunted. So two things here. You need to kind of focus on these two words. Subconscious mind and haunted. What is the meaning of the word subconscious mind? The mind which is there deep down. That is subconscious mind. So when the producer of the story, when the narrator of the story has given a beautiful description or a narration about the story, you are so involved so attentive, so taken up by the story that the characters, even after listening to the story, remains in your head and you keep thinking about it again and again. Why? Because it is there in the subconscious mind. It has gone into the subconscious mind. And you know, you are haunted. What is the meaning of haunted? You are frightened. You are scared. So, your friend must have narrated the story at 10 o'clock in the morning. The whole day you have been thinking about the characters. And at night when you go to sleep, they come scaring you. They come haunting you. You are frightened. You are terrified. You are horrified. So that is what happens in the subconscious mind. You keep on thinking about what has happened or what you have listened to, and those things come again and again, and if they are ghosts, they come to haunt you because they are already there in the subconscious mind. So it is an imagination. When you start imagining, then you try to be scared, and the imagination creates a scare in your mind and you become haunted. This exactly is the theme of the story. This is the theme of the story. Now, let us get into the characters. There are two characters in this story. Which are the two characters? One is Mahendra and the other one is ISHWARAN. The first character is Mahendra and the second one is ISHWARAN. But in fact, ISHWARAN is the protagonist of the story. What do you mean by protagonist? Protagonist is the main character of the story. If you have a main character in a story, that character is known as the protagonist or the hero. But how does ISHWARAN become a hero? We will discuss that. First, let's see who this Mahendra is. Mahendra was a young supervisor. He was working for a construction company. So you understand what the meaning of a construction company is. The company puts up or it constructs buildings. And the place where the building is constructed is known as the site. It is known as the site. S-I-T-E. It is not S-I-G-H-T, which has got something to do with the vision, but this is site means a place. So the place where the building is constructed is known as the site. So Mahendra was a supervisor who was supervising the construction work in different sites. So he was working for the construction company. So the company was putting up different constructions in different places, different sites. And Mahendra's job was to visit the site, inspect or supervise the work that was going on, and at the end of the day, he had to submit a report to the company. That was his job. But sometimes, you know, the company constructed buildings or they put up buildings in desolate places. What do you mean by desolate places? Where there are no human habitation at all, where people do not live, lonely places, covered by thick forests or a clump of trees, okay, barren land. So in such places, the company was putting up buildings and Mahendra was asked to go to that place and supervise the work that was being carried out or that was going on. He was a simple man. Mahendra was a simple man with simple needs. He was not living a very luxurious life because the salary that he was getting was minimal. So he kept his needs according to the money that he received. Then he had a wonderful companion. Companion or a servant, you may say. And who was the servant? ISHWARAN was the servant. Now, we need to kind of analyze the character of ISHWARAN. We have almost had a clear idea of Mahendra. He was a supervisor and he was supervising the construction sites or the work that was going on in the construction site. A very simple man. And ISHWARAN was his servant So wherever Mahendra was posted, Ishwaran went along with him. In other words, Ishwaran was accompanying this man. That is his master Mahendra. Okay, what did Ishwaran do for Mahendra? Ishwaran was Mahendra's cook. Because Mahendra was not good at cooking. He never had any proper idea about cooking. He did not know the ABC of cooking. He had a very vague idea, very inexperienced. But the servant, that is Ishwaran, was a wonderful cook. He was an excellent cook. How could you call him as an excellent cook? The writer says, even with the simplest things available, with the minimum vegetables and minimum condiments or masalas, you can say, he would make a tasty and a delicious dish. You can call it as sumptuous. What is the meaning of sumptuous? Very tasty. So with the little things that he had, with a few vegetables and a few condiments or few spices that he had or few masalas he had, he would make a wonderful dish for Mahendra, his master. Another thing that he did for him was washing his clothes, tidying his room as soon as he left for his work. He did everything in a perfect manner. This Ishwaran was a perfect person. In the sense, his cooking was perfect, tasty. His maintenance of the house was unquestionable, wonderfully maintained. He cleaned the rooms and he washed the clothes for Mahendra, his master, and above all, he was an excellent storyteller. That is the most important thing that you have to keep in mind. Ishwaran was an excellent storyteller. How can you say that he was an excellent storyteller? He had all these, he had all these qualities of the storytelling. He had the capacity or ability or the talent to produce a story which appeared to be realistic. So his stories were very lifelike presentations. He would create such a wonderful atmosphere which appeared to be realistic. So if he was narrating a story about an elephant, he would trumpet like an elephant, produce the cry of the elephant. He would walk like an elephant and show it to Mahendra. And he would describe the atmosphere or the surroundings where the elephant lived. So he put a lot of imagination and he used the right places. He used the right people to suit his story, and he used the right expressions and sounds to kind of make his story realistic. And above all, his stories were not flat narrations. They were realistic stories. So Ishwaran was uneducated, but he had this talent of narrating stories and making those stories realistic and lifelike. How did he acquire this art? You see, to acquire any art, to become a master of any subject, you have to practice. You have to work harder and harder and harder, and then you give your best. It does not come overnight. You have to struggle. And Ishwaran used to read crime stories or thriller stories, adventure stories. And because of that, he acquired the skill of presenting stories in a lifelike situation. So his stories appeared to be very realistic because he had the habit of reading stories, short stories, reading thriller stories, reading crime stories. That created a platform for Ishwaran. Okay. Now, what happens? Ishwaran told many stories to Mahendra, and one of the stories that he narrated was of a ghost. We all know what ghosts are. So ghosts are scary figures that come and scare you. Maybe when you're sleeping, when you have a nightmare, you find ghosts coming and threatening you or kind of terrifying you. So this man, Ishwaran, wanted to put his master into trouble. I mean, what do you mean by the trouble? He wanted to kind of produce such a realistic story which involved ghosts. And his intention was to make his master believe that what he narrated was true and he should be affected. His intention was that Mahendra should be affected. He should be scared or he should be afraid of the story. So, what exactly was that story? You see, the work site, the place where the construction work was going on was a desolate place. What do you mean by desolate? A place that was lonely. And that place was barren. What do you mean by barren? There wasn't any plant growing there. There wasn't any plant growing on that spot. It was not fit for cultivation, but it had been a burial ground. So the construction site had been a burial ground before. And you know, whenever Mahendra came back to his room, he had a temporary shed-like structure. So he finished his supervision, and when he came back in the evening, Ishwaran started to narrate or give an information about that particular place. And he told his master, you see sir, this place is a haunted place. I had already told you what the meaning of the word haunted is. This place is a haunted place, and you know, whenever somebody passes by, they will see a lot of skulls buried under the earth. So whenever I pass that site, this particular area, I always see lots of skulls buried. So this is not a safe place. But actually, what Ishwaran intended was to create a feeling of horror and create a feeling of terror in the mind of his master, that is Mahendra. And to create the terror, he cooked up a story. What do you mean by cooking up a story? Imagination. Producing a story with his imagination, and that story was one of the scariest stories that he had produced. And having listened to that story of Ishwaran, Mahendra was so shaken up, Mahendra was so terrified that ultimately he had to resign his job and leave that place. So what exactly was that story? How did Ishwaran narrate that story? What was the impact of the story on Mahendra, his master? We will discuss that in the next class. Till then, you keep these points in your mind. The major points that you need to keep is the characters of the story. One is Mahendra and the other one is Ishwaran. Mahendra was a simple man working as a supervisor in a construction site, and Ishwaran was a servant who did the washing, who did the cooking, who did the cleaning, and who also narrated stories as a means of entertainment. And keep these points in mind. The prerequisites or the characteristics of a good story. So I hope you must have got a clear picture of what I am trying to say. We will get into the details of the story in the next class. Till then, keep safe, stay safe, goodbye.